Beneath the sands of time lies a secret few civilizations can claim. Persia never died. Empires came and vanished. Conquerors burned her cities. Yet from every ruin she rose again, wiser, stronger, and eternal. Her fire temples became mosques. Her kings became poets. Her warriors became scholars. And still, her spirit breathes. In the rhythm of her language, the beauty of her art, and the quiet pride of her people. Tonight, we journey through 5,000 years of light and shadow to uncover the empire that refused to fade, the civilization that outlived time itself. Tell us, where are you watching from? Share your thoughts below. And if you believe some legacies can never die, like, share, and subscribe to Mysteries of Earth, where history's greatest souls rise once more from the echoes of eternity. There are empires that leave ruins, and there are empires that leave memory. Persia, unlike any other, built both, not to dominate, but to define the meaning of civilization itself. Though its banners fell to conquerors and its capitals turned to dust, something within it refused to die. It was not stone or throne that carried Persia forward, but an idea. The conviction that light and order, justice and truth were forces far greater than the swords that sought to destroy them. When Persepolis burned beneath Alexander's flames, the world thought it witnessed an ending. Yet as smoke rose over the desert, the true Persia, the Persia of spirit, was only just beginning its journey. Its people became the keepers of memory, carrying fragments of the ancient empire into every corner of time. Farmers still spoke the old tongue. Priests still whispered prayers to the sacred fire. Poets still dreamed of golden days when kings ruled not through fear, but through wisdom. For centuries, invaders came and went, Greeks, Arabs, Mongols, Turks, each believing they had conquered Persia. But to conquer Persia was to misunderstand her. Her power did not lie in fortresses or crowns, but in the quiet persistence of culture, in language, in art, in the unbroken rhythm of her traditions. Even when new faiths and empires swept across her mountains, the Persian soul simply absorbed them, reshaping each into something uniquely its own. To be Persian was not to live under one flag. It was to live under the memory of a sun that had once illuminated the world. From the villages of Shiraz to the cities of Khorasan, generations passed down a legacy that transcended conquest, a belief that civilization itself was a sacred duty. They built gardens in the desert to mirror paradise, carved poetry into the walls of mosques, and wove history into silk and tapestry. Even as centuries blurred and dynasties vanished, the rhythm of Persia endured. In language, in art, in the unseen bond that tied its people to a 5,000-year past. In their hearts, Cyrus was not a name in an old book, but a living presence, the king who freed nations, who taught the world that empire could be a covenant, not a cage. And so, while others measured history by what was lost, Persia measured it by what remained. Empires could rise, religions could change, and maps could be redrawn. Yet the Persian identity flowed beneath it all like an underground river, invisible but eternal. To this day, every time the new year dawns and the first light of Nowruz touches the land, Persians do not merely celebrate another year. They honor the proof that their civilization has survived every storm, every invasion, every attempt to erase it. For 5,000 years, Persia has whispered the same truth to the world, that true power does not lie in conquest or wealth, but in continuity. Empires may fall, kings may fade, but ideas, if they are born of light, never die. And so, the empire that, stretched from the Nile to the Indus still lives, not in stone, but in the spirit of a people who, even after millennia, still look to the rising sun and remember who they are. Beneath the unyielding sun of southern Iran lies a silence that speaks louder than time itself. The ruins of Persepolis, once the beating heart of the Achaemenid Empire, stand not as remnants of defeat, but as monuments of endurance. Here, stone remembers what history tried to forget. Each column, each stairway, each carved relief tells the story of a civilization that reached for eternity. It was here, 25 centuries ago, that Darius the Great envisioned more than a palace. He envisioned a mirror of the cosmos, a place where heaven and earth met under the banner of order and light. Built with a precision that defies centuries, Persepolis was more than architecture. It was philosophy in stone. Its terraces aligned with the solstice. Its walls shimmered with inscriptions declaring truth as the highest virtue. Its staircases were wide and shallow, not for soldiers, but for peace, for the procession of nations who came not as slaves, but as allies, bearing gifts from every corner of the known world. This was the heart of the first true world empire, an empire that ruled not through terror, but through tolerance. And in the heart of it all, Persepolis was the symbol of harmony. Here, Babylonian astronomers, Egyptian artisans, and Greek scholars walked together under one roof, proof that civilization could unite rather than divide. But even paradise cannot escape the fire of conquest. When Alexander's army reached the Persian plateau, they saw not the grandeur of human spirit, but the spoils of victory. One night, the city burned. Flames devoured cedar roofs, gold melted into rivers, and the great palace of Xerxes turned to ash. Yet even as Persepolis burned, something deeper survived. Beneath the smoke and ruin, the stones absorbed the echo of prayers, the footsteps of kings, the rhythm of ceremonies that had once celebrated the triumph of truth over chaos. He conqueror left, but the spirit of Persepolis remained, hidden, waiting, enduring beneath centuries of dust. Today, when the desert wind sighs through those broken columns, it carries whispers, not of destruction but of remembrance. Archaeologists who walk these grounds speak of an uncanny presence, a feeling that time has not truly passed here. For within the geometry of its ruins, Persia's dream still breathes. Each carving on the Apadana staircase still tells the story of unity. Ethiopians, Indians, Armenians, Medes, all offering tribute to a single throne. They stand side by side, frozen in stone, a vision of diversity that predates every empire that came after. Even the smallest detail speaks. The lotus, carved again and again into the marble, symbolized renewal, the eternal rebirth of the world. To the Persians, nothing truly ended. Everything was part of a divine cycle. And in that belief, Persepolis became eternal, surviving not in form, but in meaning. Today, the city stands quiet, its gates open to the wind, its stairways leading not to kings, but to memory. Yet those who come here do not find ruins. They find a message, carved across the ages, that civilization, once awakened, never truly dies. For under every fallen empire lies the same truth. Persepolis still whispers that light may flicker, but it is never extinguished. And so, among its shattered columns, Persia still speaks. A voice from the past reminding the world that greatness is not measured by conquest, but by the endurance of the soul. Long before the rise of the great world religions, before temples of stone, before the written word, there burned a single flame on the Iranian plateau. It was not the fire of war or conquest, but of truth. The ancient Persians called it Attar, the sacred fire, the living symbol of Asher, the divine order that governed the universe. And at the heart of that light stood a name whispered through millennia: Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Wisdom. This was the faith of Zoroaster, or Zarathustra, a prophet whose words would shape not just Persia, but the spiritual foundations of the world. Scholars debate his time, some say 3,000 years ago, others more, yet his message remains timeless. He spoke of a cosmic struggle between light and darkness, truth and falsehood, creation and decay. But unlike the myths of chaos and revenge that filled other lands, Zoroaster offered hope. Humanity, he said, was not a pawn in this war. It was a participant. Each thought, word, and deed was a weapon in the eternal battle for good. In that revelation, Persia found its soul. Kings and commoners alike embraced the path of righteousness, not out of fear, but conviction. Good thoughts, good words, good deeds became the creed of an empire that believed morality itself could shape destiny. Across the mountains and deserts of ancient Iran, fire temples rose, not to worship flame, but to honor the light within all creation. The sacred fires were tended day and night, never allowed to die, for they symbolized purity and truth. To extinguish them was to invite darkness into the world. Even now, in hidden temples across Yazd and Kerman, those flames still burn, some said to have never gone out for over 1,000 years. But Zoroastrianism was more than religion. It was a revolution of the mind. It introduced humanity to ideas we now take for granted: heaven and hell, angels and demons, the final judgment, and the coming of a savior. These beliefs would echo through Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, carried quietly across time through Persian scholars, travelers, and refugees. When Cyrus the Great declared freedom of faith for the peoples of his empire, it was Zoroastrian ideals that guided his hand. When Darius carved his proclamations in stone, invoking truth over deceit, he was echoing Zarathustra's ancient wisdom. The empire's justice system, its ethics, even its administration, all were reflections of that spiritual order. And yet, what made Zoroastrianism endure was not its kings or its priests, but its fire, an unbroken symbol of inner purity. For Persians, fire was not worshipped, but witnessed. It was the visible breath of the unseen divine, a reminder that truth, like flame, must be protected, fed, and passed on. Even as new religions swept across Persia, the light did not vanish. It went underground, hiding in poetry, architecture, and ritual. The Persian love for illumination, for gardens of symmetry and light, for words that celebrate the triumph of truth, all of it carries the essence of that ancient faith. To this day, during Nowruz, when families light candles at the dawn of spring, they are unknowingly repeating an act older than empires, a tribute to the eternal light that once united a civilization. Because in the story of Persia, fire is more than an element. It is a memory of a time when humanity first looked beyond survival and dared to seek meaning. And though the temples have fallen, the flame remains, steady, silent, immortal, burning not only in sanctuaries of stone, but in the hearts of those who still follow the path of truth. For Persia's oldest faith was never just about worship. It was about awakening, a reminder that within every human soul, a divine spark still waits to rise toward the light. In the windswept plains of ancient Anshan, among rugged hills and desert silence, a child was born whose destiny would transcend the borders of kings. His name was Cyrus, son of Cambyses, descendant of warriors and dreamers, a man who would rise not merely to rule, but to redefine what it meant to lead. When Cyrus came of age, the world was fractured. Kingdoms devoured kingdoms, empires rose through fear, and the gods were said to favor only the ruthless. Yet, from the heart of Persia emerged a different vision. Cyrus did not dream of domination. He dreamt of harmony, a world bound not by chains, but by law, mercy, and respect. His rise began with rebellion, not of greed, but of purpose. Against the Median Empire, his own kin, he waged a war that was as strategic as it was swift. But when victory came, he did not enslave his enemies or burn their cities. He married diplomacy to conquest, The Medes became Persians, and Persia became something the world had never seen before. A union of peoples, a federation of nations, an empire built upon coexistence rather than cruelty. As his armies marched across the known world, from the mountains of Anatolia to the fertile lands of Mesopotamia, the world watched in awe. Kingdoms expected a conqueror. Instead, they met a liberator. When Cyrus entered Babylon in 539 BCE, he did not destroy its temples. He restored them. He freed captives, allowed exiled peoples to return home, and decreed that no man or woman should be forced to worship against their will. It was here that the Cyrus cylinder was born, a small clay artifact inscribed with words that would echo across millennia. It proclaimed freedom, tolerance, and justice, principles that would one day inspire the very foundations of modern human rights. In a time when kings spoke of divine right, Cyrus spoke of divine duty. He ruled through balance, between faith and phrase. Edom, strength and compassion, order and diversity. His empire was vast, but its heart beat with a simple truth, that greatness does not come from fear, but from fairness. Under his reign, roads were built not merely for soldiers, but for merchants and messengers. The Persian postal system, centuries ahead of its time, connected a world that had never before been united. And from his capital at Pasargadae, Cyrus created not just monuments of stone, but a philosophy, that the measure of a ruler's power is found in the peace of his people. Even his death was said to reflect his humility. When he fell in battle against the eastern tribes, there was no golden tomb waiting, only a modest chamber, still standing today amid the quiet plains. On it, an inscription said to be his own reads, "O man, whoever you are and from wherever you come, for I know you will come. I am Cyrus, who founded the Persian Empire. Do not grudge me this little earth that covers my body." It was the voice of a man who ruled half the known world, yet saw himself as a servant of it. To the Persians, Cyrus was not merely a king. He was the embodiment of Asher, the truth and order of the cosmos. To later generations, he became a legend, a symbol of enlightened rule. Even the Greeks, his future rivals, called him Cyrus the Great, not out of submission, but respect. And so his idea lived on, that an empire could be powerful without being cruel, that conquest could coexist with compassion, and that law, not fear, could hold the world together. In every civilization that rose after him, traces of his vision remained, echoes of a time when a king dared to believe that power's highest purpose was peace. There was a time when the world seemed impossibly vast, divided by deserts, mountains, and seas that few dared to cross. Yet from the heart of Persia, a vision arose that would bind these lands together. It began not with war, but with design, a grand architecture of order conceived by the heirs of Cyrus and perfected under the reign of Darius the Great. The Achaemenid Empire, stretching from the banks of the Nile to the valleys of the Indus, was more than a conquest. It was the world's first experiment in global governance, an empire built not on domination, but on harmony. Within its borders lived more than 30 nations, each speaking their own tongue, worshipping their own gods, yet all united beneath a single law, the Asher, the divine truth that guided Persian rule. At the heart of this vast civilization stood Persepolis, Susa, and Ecbatana, cities that shimmered like jewels upon the earth. Here, courtiers from distant lands met under the shadow of carved lions and winged bulls. Gold from Lydia, ivory from India, cedar from Lebanon, all flowed into the empire's heart, not as tribute to tyranny, but as symbols of mutual respect. Darius understood what no ruler before him had, that an empire endures not through fear, but through structure. He divided his dominion into satrapies, provinces ruled by governors who answered to the great king, yet respected local traditions. Justice was codified, taxes standardized, weights and measures unified. Even coinage bore his mark, the daric stamped with the image of an archer, a symbol not of oppression, but of precision and balance. Across the empire, the royal road stretched like a golden thread, over 2,700 kilometers from Sardis to Susa, lined with stations where couriers changed horses and messengers carried news at lightning speed. Herodotus wrote that neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor darkness of night would delay those riders, words later echoed in the creed of modern postal systems. It was this web of communication that turned the Achaemenid world into something new, a civilization aware of itself. Goods, knowledge, and ideas traveled freely. Astronomy from Babylon, medicine from Egypt, philosophy from Greece, all finding a home in the Persian sphere. And while the kings ruled from palaces of marble and gold, their true legacy was invisible, the quiet rhythm of order that pulsed through every corner of their realm. Farmers sowed and harvested in peace, merchants crossed continents without fear, artisans worked in cities that thrived on tolerance and trade. Even the empire's armies were mosaics of diversity, Medes, Egyptians, Indians, and Scythians marching together beneath the golden standard of the great king. In their unity lay Persia's strength, a reflection of the cosmic harmony Zoroaster had once preached, that every element has its place in the order of creation. When foreign envoys entered the royal court, they saw more than splendor. They witnessed an idea made real, that humanity could exist in balance, each nation a note in a grander symphony. But such harmony, like all things mortal, was fragile. The empire that had brought order to chaos would one day face its own test, when the ambitions of others sought to unravel what Persia had woven. Yet even as empires fell and centuries passed, the Achaemenid vision endured, reborn in every government that sought justice, in every civilization that valued peace through law. For in the story of the Achaemenids, Persia achieved something eternal. It transformed power into principle, empire into order, and the dream of unity into reality. From Egypt to India, through deserts and mountains, roads of stone and gold carried not merely soldiers or merchants, they carried a vision, a promise whispered by kings. We believed that greatness lay not in conquest, but in connection. The world may have forgotten their names, but the order they built still shapes it. The desert night was still when the conqueror arrived, a silence broken only by the echo of marching boots and the distant hiss of torches. To the Greeks, he was Alexander the Great, son of Zeus, master of the known world. But to the Persians, he was something else, a storm out of the west, a shadow that sought to eclipse the sun. When Alexander entered Persepolis in 330 BCE, the empire of Cyrus and Darius was already wounded, but not yet dead. The Achaemenid line had fallen, its king Darius III slain, betrayed by his own men. Yet the land itself, the heart of Persia, still pulsed with memory. The conqueror stood among its palaces, gazing upon columns that touched the sky and carvings that whispered of kings who ruled through wisdom rather than fear. It is said that he walked the grand halls of Xerxes, where walls once shimmered with gold and lapis. There, the weight of Persia's greatness hung heavy on his shoulders. Alexander, taught by Aristotle and inspired by Homer, had always sought glory. But in Persepolis, he confronted something deeper, the majesty of an idea far older than Greece. Some accounts say he admired the city. Others say envy took hold, that the splendor of Persia made even the son of Olympus feel small. What we know is this. One night, during a feast, the torches were lit higher, the wine flowed thicker, and a decision was made that would echo across history. The city was set aflame. Fire devoured cedar beams, melted gold, and turned marble to ash. Statues of kings, once carved to defy eternity, cracked under the heat of human pride. The flames reached into the heavens, a pyre for a civilization. Alexander watched as the Empire of Light, the dream of Cyrus and Darius, became smoke against the stars. Yet what burned that night was not an ending, but a transformation. For while Persepolis turned to cinders, the spirit of Persia did not die in tea, he blaze. The knowledge stored in her libraries, the ethics written into her laws, the reverence for truth and order, these could not be burned. They passed quietly into the world that followed. Greek scholars studied Persian governance. Hellenistic kings adopted Persian titles and customs. Even Alexander himself began to wear the robes of an Eastern monarch. The conqueror had not destroyed Persia. He had become part of it. It is said that after the fire, regret haunted him. Some claimed he tried to rebuild parts of the city, that he sought forgiveness from Ahura Mazda, whose temples he had violated. Perhaps he realized that while armies can conquer lands, they cannot conquer memory. For centuries afterward, the ruins of Persepolis stood as both wound and warning, the skeletal remains of an empire that refused to vanish. Travelers from Rome to Arabia came to marvel at the fallen pillars, unable to believe that mortals had ever built such perfection. And beneath the silence of stone, Persia continued, in language, in art, in faith, in the unbroken pride of its people. Alexander's empire would fracture within a generation, his cities swallowed by dust and rebellion. But Persia's legacy endured, woven into the cultures that rose in his wake. The conqueror who sought to burn the sun only scattered its light. For fire can destroy flesh and stone, but it cannot touch the eternal flame of a civilization that has already transcended death. And so, long after Alexander's name became legend, the spirit of Persia lived on, glowing beneath the ashes, waiting for the wind of time to breathe it back into flame. When the Achaemenid palaces fell silent and the Macedonian banners faded from the wind, it seemed as though Persia had finally vanished into the pages of history. The Empire of Light had been conquered, its kings dethroned, its cities scattered to ruin. And yet, beneath that silence, something ancient stirred. Out of the steppes of Central Asia rode a people few had heard of. The Pani, a nomadic tribe hardened by endless horizons and desert winds. They carried no golden emblems, no royal decrees, no cities of marble, only endurance, instinct, and an unshakable memory. Under the leadership of Arsaces, they swept into the forgotten heart of Iran and reclaimed what had been lost. From this unlikely beginning, a new Persia was born, the Parthian Empire, the bridge between ancient glory and future rebirth. Unlike the grand architects of Cyrus or the visionaries of Darius, the Parthians ruled from the saddle. Their power came not from palaces, but from movement. They were masters of adaptation, balancing the legacy of Persia with the chaos of the post-Alexandrian world. Their empire stretched from the Euphrates to the Hindu Kush, vast and unpredictable, a realm where Greek cities met Persian sanctuaries, and caravans from China wound through mountain passes bearing silk and secrets alike. The Parthians understood something the conquerors never did, that survival, not splendor, is the true measure of civilization. They allowed local kings to rule, local languages to flourish, local faiths to endure. The Zoroastrian fire temples burned once more, their flames flickering defiantly against the shadow of foreign gods. And with time, the Parthians became the shadow that haunted the ambitions of Rome. For nearly 5 centuries, they stood as a silent wall against the Western world's greatest empire. At Carrhae, their horse archers annihilated the legions of Crassus, a victory so shocking that it would be whispered in Rome for generations. Swift, elusive, and unstoppable, the Parthians turned the desert itself into a weapon. But they were not mere warriors. They were traders, diplomats, and custodians of memory. Through their lands flowed the arteries of the Silk Road, carrying silk from China, spices from India, glass from Syria, and philosophy from Greece, all converging in Persian markets that buzzed with the voices of a dozen civilizations. And in those markets, under the shade of desert tents, the idea of Persia, as a center of balance, culture, and wisdom, was reborn. The Parthian kings, the Arsacids, adopted the customs of their Achaemenid ancestors. They crowned themselves with Persian tiaras, revived ancient ceremonies, and minted coins bearing both Greek and Persian inscriptions, a fusion of East and West, power and patience. To outsiders, they seemed fragmented, a confederation of noble houses constantly shifting alliances. But this flexibility was their strength. It allowed Persia to breathe again, to heal in silence after centuries of invasion and loss. Their empire left no great monuments like Persepolis, no golden cylinders or monumental inscriptions. Instead, their legacy was subtle, a cultural thread that wove continuity into chaos. Through them, Persia learned once again how to survive without being seen, how to endure without empire, how to exist in shadow until light returned. And so, while the Romans built walls and monuments to mark their might, the Parthians built something far greater: resilience. When the Arsacid dynasty finally gave way to the Sassanids, Persia did not awaken from oblivion. It simply stepped out of the shadow it had patiently sustained for centuries. The world would remember Cyrus and Darius as its founders, but it was the Parthians who ensured their memory lived on. For in the long silence of empire, they kept the flame alive, hidden, guarded, and waiting for the wind to rise again. From the ashes of forgotten dynasties, Persia rose once more, not as a shadow, but as a flame reborn. The Sasanian Empire emerged like dawn over the ruins of Parthia, radiant and deliberate, carrying the memory of Cyrus, the wisdom of Zoroaster, and the unbroken thread of a civilization that refused to die. Under the banner of Ardashir Furs, the empire reawakened, and under Khosrau Furs, known as Anushirvan the Just, it flourished into something more profound than conquest. It became a civilization of light, where knowledge itself was sacred, and every temple, library, and observatory reflected the divine harmony of creation. The empire stretched from the deserts of Arabia to the valleys of the Indus, from the mountains of Armenia to the blue waters of the Persian Gulf. But its greatest power was not its reach, it was its vision. In Khosrau's Persia, kings ruled as philosophers, priests as scientists, and scholars as seekers of divine truth. In the grand city of Gundishapur, something extraordinary was born, a sanctuary where Greek philosophy, Indian medicine, and Persian wisdom converged. Here, the world's first great academy of science thrived, centuries before Europe's Renaissance would even stir. Physicians from Alexandria studied alongside scholars from India. Astronomers charted the heavens, while mathematicians calculated the patterns of stars and fate alike. Knowledge was not merely preserved, it was illuminated. The Zoroastrian temples, crowned with flames that never died, symbolized more than faith. They embodied enlightenment, a belief that the universe itself was a struggle between darkness and light, ignorance and understanding. To seek wisdom, then, was not just learning, it was worship. Khosrau. I believed that justice was divine order reflected on earth. He reformed laws, stabilized taxes, and treated governance as a sacred balance. His title, Anushir, Van the Just, became legend, not for conquest, but for fairness. Under his reign, even enemies found refuge. Greek philosophers, exiled by the Byzantine Emperor Justinian, fled east, and Khosrau welcomed them. Let knowledge find sanctuary where it is honored, he is said to have declared. And so, Persia became the world's last light before the coming darkness, a bridge between the ancient and the modern, between reason and reverence. The arts, too, blossomed in splendor. From the silverwork of Ctesiphon to the murals of Bishapur, every creation bore the symbol of cosmic order, the eternal struggle of good and evil, the divine flame guarded by human hands. Music, Poetry and architecture thrived in balance with faith. To build, to compose, to think, all were acts of devotion. The Sasanians saw themselves not merely as rulers of a kingdom, but as custodians of the world's balance. To them, Persia was not a land. It was an idea, a reflection of Ahura Mazda's order on earth. Even their battles with Rome and Byzantium were framed as struggles between light and chaos, wisdom and arrogance. Yet every flame, no matter how divine, casts a shadow. As centuries passed, the empire's brilliance drew envy and conflict. Wars with Byzantium drained its strength, internal rivalries cracked its unity, and when a new faith rose from the sands of Arabia, preaching simplicity over splendor, the great Sasanian light began to wane. But the dream did not die. Its spirit flowed into the scholars of Baghdad, into the manuscripts that preserved Greek thought, into the very veins of Islamic science and philosophy that would one day rekindle the world's curiosity. The Sasanian flame passed beyond kings and temples. It became part of humanity's collective memory, the eternal whisper that civilization must be guided not just by power, but by light. And so the story of Khosrow and his Sc. Holers remains not a tale of a fallen empire, but a reminder that wisdom once kindled can outlast even time itself. When the crescent moon rose over the ruins of Ctesiphon, it did not mark an ending. It marked a transformation. The armies of Islam had come from the desert, carrying the verses of a new revelation, the promise of unity under one God. Yet as the banners of the Sasanian Empire fell, something remarkable happened. Persia did not vanish beneath the tide. It adapted, absorbed, and ultimately reshaped what had come to claim it. The great Zoroastrian fires, once tended in silence by priests, now flickered beside the call to prayer. In the bazaars of the new Islamic cities, the tongue of the prophet met the wisdom of Zarathustra. And from that meeting, that collision of fire and faith, a new civilization began to take form, unlike anything the world had ever seen. The fall of the Sasanian Empire could have meant the end of Persia, but Persians had long understood something deeper than conquest. Empires may fall, but identity, once awakened, is immortal. They had survived Alexander, Rome, and centuries of invasion. This was not the first storm, and it would not be the last. Instead of resisting the new order, Persia quietly wove itself into it. Persian administrators helped build the new Islamic caliphate. Persian scholars became its teachers. Persian architecture shaped its mosques, its palaces, its cities. Even the very structure of Islamic governance, from bureaucracy to philosophy, bore the fingerprints of a civilization older than time. In the shadows of this cultural fusion, the flame of Ahura Mazda found a new language. Where once the sacred fire symbolized truth and order, now divine unity, Tawheed, carried the same light. The words changed, but the essence remained. Light versus darkness, knowledge over ignorance, order over chaos. The eternal Persian philosophy of duality found a new reflection in Islamic mysticism, in the poetry of Sufis, who sang of the same fire by another name. And in this new dawn, Persia gave birth to minds that would redefine the Islamic world. Avicenna, Ibn Sina, whose works would shape medicine and philosophy for 1,000 years. Al-Khwarizmi, whose name gave birth to the word algorithm. And poets like Rumi and Hafez, whose verses carried the rhythm of the old world dressed in the music of the new. It was as if the soul of Persia had learned a secret long before others, that survival is not resistance, but transformation. By embracing the rising faith, Persia ensured that its essence would not die but spread, through science, art, and spirituality, across the very empire that once conquered it. Ctesiphon fell silent, but new cities rose. Baghdad, Nishapur, Rai, Isfahan. Within their walls, Persian scholars translated the wisdom of Greece, India, and their own ancestors into Arabic, preserving the world's knowledge when the West had forgotten it. The libraries of the Abbasids became modern Alexandria, and at their heart, the hands that copied, the minds that interpreted, were Persian. Even Islam itself, as it matured, carried within it the cadence of Persian thought. Mysticism, philosophy, and beauty woven into its core. Persian poets reimagined paradise not as distant, but as a garden of the soul. The Paradisa of old, reborn in new words. Persian mystics spoke of love as divine fire, a reflection of that same eternal flame that once burned in Zoroastrian temples. And so, though the altars of fire were extinguished, their light never died. It lived on in the words, the art, and the faith of a people who could not be conquered, because they carried eternity within. In the meeting of crescent and flame, Persia did what it had always done best. It turned conquest into creation, faith into philosophy, and defeat into rebirth. The empire was gone, but its spirit, clothed in the language of Islam, was reborn into a new golden age. For Persia did not end in fire. It became the fire that still burns, unseen but eternal, within the heart of a civilization that would shape the world. When the Abbasid Caliphate rose in the 8th century, it was more than a political shift. It was a rebirth of knowledge. Baghdad, shimmering along the Tigris River, became the new heart of the world. Its streets glowed not only with the gold of trade, but with the light of intellect. And within that light, it was Persia that quietly reawakened. Centuries after the fall of Ctesiphon, Persian minds returned to prominence, no longer as kings and priests, but as scholars, poets, and architects of the new world. The Abbasid revolution had found its spiritual capital in Baghdad, but its soul, its structure, and its brilliance were profoundly Persian. From Khorasan to Rai, from Isfahan to Merv, thinkers journeyed westward, carrying with them the ancient traditions of the Achaemenids, the sciences of the Sasanians, and the wisdom of Zoroastrian philosophy. They entered a city eager to learn, and what followed would shape civilization for centuries to come. In the bustling quarters of Baghdad stood the Bait al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. Here, under the Abbasid caliphs, Persian scholars translated, preserved, and expanded upon the knowledge of worlds past. The works of Aristotle, Plato, and Hippocrates were reborn through Persian eyes, refined, questioned, and elevated. But this was not mere translation. It was transformation. Among these minds was Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, a Persian polymath whose name would echo through time. His treatises on mathematics birthed algebra, and algorithms that would one day guide the age of machines. Through him, Persia's love for order, symmetry, and cosmic balance found new expression in numbers and logic. There was Ibn Sina, or Avicenna, a man who united medicine, metaphysics, and reason. His canon of medicine would become the foundation of medical science from Spain to China. He carried within him the dual flame of old, Persia and the light of Islam, the perfect embodiment of a civilization reborn through knowledge. And beyond the scholars, there were poets. Persian thought had always moved between science and spirit, and nowhere was this seen clearer than in the verses of Rumi, Ferdowsi, and Omar Khayyam. Their poetry, born in the age of Abbasid enlightenment, sang of creation as a divine mystery, where love, reason, and fate intertwined like stars across the night sky. The Persian mind did not just rebuild the world's knowledge, it redefined it. Astronomy reached new heights under Persian eyes, where scholars charted the stars not for conquest, but for understanding. Medicine became not merely the art of healing, but the study of harmony within the human soul. Philosophy bridged the seen and unseen, merging Greek rationalism with Persian mysticism, faith with reason. Baghdad was a city of light, but that light was fed by the fire of Persia, a flame that had never truly gone out. The Abbasids gave it a home. Persia gave it a purpose. From architecture to administration, from literature to law, Persian influence shaped the very identity of the Islamic Golden Age. The caliphs ruled, but the Persians imagined. They created the structures that would define civilization: libraries, observatories, universities, temples not of stone, but of thought. And as the centuries turned, this intellectual empire would spread far beyond Baghdad, echoing through Moorish Spain, medieval Europe, and the Renaissance yet to come. It was a quiet revolution. One fought not with swords, but with ink. The same empire that had once fallen to foreign conquest now conquered the world with its ideas. For Persia had learned the greatest secret of all, that knowledge is immortality. And in the age of the Abbasids, as parchment replaced stone and wisdom replaced war, the Persian spirit achieved its greatest victory, the victory of the mind. From the ashes of empires rose a new dawn, and once again Persia stood at its center, radiant, eternal, and awake. Long after the banners of kings had faded and the clang of empires fell silent, a new power rose across the Persian world, one not forged in steel, but in words. Out of centuries of war, conquest, and transformation, Persia found a voice that would never die. The poets became its new emperors, their verses the maps of its soul. And through them, through Ferdowsi, Hafez, and Rumi, Persia conquered eternity itself. In the twilight of the 10th century, a man named Abu al-Qasim Ferdowsi sat beneath the shadow of fading dynasties and began to write. The empire of his ancestors was gone, the ancient tongue of Persia fading under foreign influence. But Ferdowsi was not merely a poet, he was a savior of memory. For 30 years he labored over his masterpiece, the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings. In its 60,000 couplets, Ferdowsi resurrected Persia's forgotten past, from the creation of the world to the fall of the Sasanian Empire. He gave voice to heroes and kings, to battles and betrayals, to gods and men who defined what it meant to be Persian. The Shahnameh was not just literature, it was a rebirth. It reminded a conquered people that their story did not end in defeat. It lived on in language, in rhythm, in memory. Through Ferdowsi, the Persian language itself was reborn. His words preserved a civilization when no army could. His lines carried the spirit of Zoroaster, the honor of Cyrus, the wisdom of Darius, all speaking again through the cadence of verse. In a world ruled by new empires, the Shahnameh was Persia's declaration: we still are. Centuries later, another voice rose, softer but deeper, resonating through the heart like music. Khwaja Shams al-Din Hafez, born in the gardens of Shiraz, wrote not of kings and wars, but of the soul's longing for freedom. His poetry was a mirror reflecting both divine truth and human desire. Beneath his metaphors of wine, a love and beauty lay something more profound, a rebellion against hypocrisy, an embrace of spiritual joy, a defiance of fear. To read Hafez was to drink from the cup of enlightenment. His verses spoke of a world where love was the highest form of worship, where truth could be found not in temples or thrones, but in the human heart. For Persians under centuries of change and constraint, his words were liberation, reminding them that the soul, like Persia itself, could never be imprisoned. And then came Jalal al-Din Rumi, a mystic whose poetry transcended borders, faiths, and time. His words flowed not just through Persia, but through the veins of humanity itself. Rumi saw God in motion, in love, in the whirling of the cosmos. The wound is the place where the light enters you, he wrote, a reflection of Persia's eternal truth, that from every conquest, from every pain, something divine is born. Rumi's verses became a bridge between heaven and earth, between the seen and unseen. They carried the Zoroastrian reverence for light, the Sufi yearning for union, and the Persian belief that truth must be felt before it can be understood. His words became a river that would never run dry, carrying the essence of Persia into every language, every century. Together these poets forged an empire far greater than any that had come before. Ferdowsi gave Persia its memory, Hafez gave it its heart, and Rumi gave it its soul. Their words traveled beyond deserts and dynasties, surviving where armies could not. And so, while kings built empires that crumbled, the poets built one that could not, a kingdom of verse and spirit, where time itself bowed in silence. For in Persia, the sword ruled for centuries. But it was the poem that conquered forever. Across the arid heart of ancient Persia, where the sun blazed unrelenting and the earth cracked beneath its own thirst, humanity did something extraordinary. It built paradise. Not a mythic one, not a dream beyond death, but one that bloomed in the living world. The Persian garden, born thousands of years ago, was more than a marvel of irrigation and design. It was a philosophy carved into soil, a reflection of balance, of harmony, of the eternal longing to bring heaven down to earth. In a land where water meant life itself, every drop became sacred. The Persians learned to tame the desert through ingenuity, digging qanats, underground channels that carried water from distant mountains to barren plains. From these unseen rivers, life began to flourish. Gardens emerged where none should exist, oases of order and calm amid chaos and heat. They called it Paridesa, a walled garden. It was a space not just for kings, but for reflection. Shade and symmetry became acts of devotion. Geometry was prayer. Every garden was built upon 4 divisions, symbolizing the elements, the directions, and the harmony of creation. These became known as the Chahar Bagh, the 4 gardens, a design that would echo through Babylon, Greece, Mughal India, and beyond, inspiring the very idea of paradise itself. But the Persian garden was not simply architecture, it was a mirror of the cosmos. Water flowed like veins of light through marble channels, reflecting the sky. Cypress trees reached upward, eternal symbols of strength and life. Fruit trees bore the sweetness of renewal, and flowers bloomed in precise patterns, arranged as if by divine geometry. Here, the human and the divine met quietly, in the stillness between sunlight and water. To walk through a Persian garden was to step into philosophy. Every path was intentional, every turn designed to draw the soul inward. The sound of running water softened the noise of the world. The scent of roses reminded one that beauty, like life, was fleeting yet eternal. Kings may have ruled these spaces, but their power faded at the garden's gate, for inside only balance ruled. Over centuries, this vision traveled with Persia's empire and its poets alike. From the gardens of Pasargadae, built under Cyrus the Great, where rivers crossed at perfect angles, to the royal gardens of Isfahan and Shiraz, the ideal remained the same: harmony between man, nature, and the divine. Even when Persia was conquered, its gardens continued to conquer hearts. The very word paradise, carried through Greek as paradisos and later into every language of faith, was born here, in these green sanctuaries of thought and silence. And when the empires of Islam rose, the Persian concept of heaven itself took its form from these earthly havens, rivers flowing beneath shaded trees, eternal gardens where peace would reign forever. The garden became a living scripture. Its symmetry spoke of divine order. Its shade offered mercy. Its water symbolized purity and renewal. For Persians, to cultivate a garden was to participate in creation, to remind the world that even in the harshest lands, beauty could thrive. Centuries later, Travelers would come from distant lands and find themselves entranced. The Mughals would build the Taj Mahal's gardens in its image. European palaces would borrow its balance and reflection. Yet, none captured the soul of the original. The stillness, the sacred geometry, the quiet conversation between man and eternity. In the end, the Persian garden was not merely a place. It was a statement. Against drought, it offered abundance. Against death, it promised life. Against chaos, it stood for perfect harmony. And as the wind still moves through the cypress leaves of Shiraz and Kashan, that ancient truth endure, that paradise was never lost, only cultivated. In the heart of the desert, Persia taught the world that heaven could bloom from dust, that even time itself could grow a garden. In the heart of Persia, where faith met mathematics and poetry met precision, a new kind of art was born, one that sought not to imitate creation, but to reveal the divine order beneath it. It was an art that transformed words into worlds, and geometry into worship. This was the calligraphy of heaven, where every line, curve, and pattern became a bridge between the human and the eternal. When Islam spread across Persia, it forbade the depiction of living beings in sacred spaces, not out of fear, but reverence. To portray the divine, they turned to the abstract. The Persians, already masters of design and proportion, found in this restriction an infinite freedom. With pen, tile, and stone, they painted the invisible. Faith became form, belief became beauty. In the mosques of Isfahan, Shiraz, and Tabriz, the walls themselves began to speak. The Arabic script, once a tool of record, became a vessel of spirit. Each letter stretched like a breath. Each curve flowed like a river, together forming verses from the Quran that shimmered across domes and minarets. To stand beneath these vaults was to feel language transcend its limits, to sense that every stroke of ink was a whisper of creation itself. But this was not merely writing, it was mathematical devotion. Persian artists, drawing from ancient knowledge of symmetry and proportion, built sacred geometry into every design. Stars unfolded into stars, patterns mirrored the heavens, and each tile fit into another, like the logic of the cosmos. Where others saw decoration, the Persians saw revelation, the structure of the universe, drawn by human hands. The dome, that most perfect of forms, became their canvas. Within its curves, calligraphy and geometry met, words spiraling upward toward infinity. The verse of God became light itself, captured and reflected through patterns that seemed to move when the sun passed across them. The artisans who built these marvels did not sign their names, for the work was not theirs alone. It belonged to the divine order they sought to honor. Yet the calligraphy of heaven did not live only on stone. It flowed across silk, paper, and metal. Persian manuscripts became sanctuaries in miniature. Every page a universe of gold leaf, lapis lazuli, and ink. The Shahnameh, the Masnavi, the Quran, all became more than text. They became living art, where script and image blended into a visual symphony of devotion. Through these works, the Persians expressed something eternal, that beauty itself could be a form of prayer. To write beautifully was to praise creation. To draw perfect symmetry was to mirror divine balance, and to combine art and faith was to dissolve the distance between mortal and God. Even beyond religion, this philosophy shaped Persia's vision of the world. Carpets were woven with cosmic patterns, medallions representing the heavens, borders marking the edge of eternity. Pottery, metalwork, and architecture all echoed the same language of geometry and grace. Every object, no matter how ordinary, was a reminder that the divine lived in the details. Centuries later, travelers would stand in awe before these creations, the turquoise domes of Isfahan, the mirrored halls of Shiraz, the delicate manuscripts that outlived empires. Each was a message, not written to be read, but to be felt. For the Persians understood that true art does not speak in words. It speaks in silence, in balance, in the rhythm of form and light. Their calligraphy was not meant to be deciphered, but to be experienced, a visual echo of the cosmos itself. And so, long after the ink has dried and the empires have turned to dust, the calligraphy of heaven still glows across the tiles and scrolls of Iran. It whispers the same truth that has guided Persian civilization for millennia. Lenia, that beauty is not a mirror of God. In the luminous age of the Abbasid Caliphate, when Baghdad rose as the beating heart of the known world, something extraordinary was stirring. Not merely an empire of gold and trade, but an empire of thought. Beneath its domes and libraries, Persian minds awakened, weaving together ancient wisdom and new revelation to forge the foundation of modern science. It was here, in the House of Wisdom, Bait al-Hikmah, that knowledge from Greece, India, Egypt, and Persia converged like tributaries flowing into one mighty river. Scholars gathered beneath oil lamps, translating, questioning, and reimagining everything humanity had known about the cosmos. Yet it was the Persians, heirs to the Achaemenid dream and Zoroastrian curiosity, who gave this new world its language of logic and discovery. Among them was Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, the man whose name still echoes in every calculation. Algorithm. In his ink-stained manuscripts, numbers became a universal language, freed from the limitations of Roman numerals. His work, Al-Jabr, gave birth to algebra, a discipline that allowed humanity to see the unseen patterns of reality. To him, mathematics was not just a tool of commerce or engineering, it was a mirror of divine order, a key to understanding the symmetry of creation itself. While Al-Khwarizmi mapped the invisible, another Persian mind was exploring the rhythms of life itself. Al-Razi, known to the West as Rhazes, became one of the first true physicians in history. He refused to accept superstition or divine punishment as the cause of disease. Instead, he looked to observation, experimentation, and compassion. He catalogued illnesses, differentiated measles from smallpox, and revolutionized the use of hospitals as places of healing, not merely refuge. His belief was simple yet radical. The human mind was as capable of curing the body as faith was of soothing the soul. Then came Ibn Sina, Avicenna, the philosopher-physician whose works would define medical thought for nearly 1,000 years. His canon of medicine became the standard in both the Islamic and European worlds, uniting reason, observation, and ethics. But beyond medicine, Avicenna dared to ask the questions that lay at the edge of thought itself. What is the soul? What is reality? What is the connection between the physical and the divine? In his writings, the Persian spirit of inquiry reached its highest form, one that saw no conflict between faith and reason, only different languages describing the same truth. The Persian scholars of the Abbasid age were not confined to books and instruments. They were architects of imagination. Astronomers like al-Biruni mapped the Earth's circumference with astonishing accuracy, centuries before Europe rediscovered such precision. He studied eclipses, planetary motion, and even suggested the possibility that Earth rotated on its axis. Ideas so far ahead of their time, they would not be proven until long after his death. To the Persians, knowledge was not conquest. It was harmony, a way of aligning the human mind with the grand design of the universe. They saw in mathematics the balance of justice, in medicine the compassion of the Creator, and in astronomy the poetry of divine order. Their genius lay not only in discovery, but in synthesis, merging reason and revelation, observation and wonder, intellect and imagination. And so, in the marble halls of Baghdad, the Persian mind was reborn, not as a servant of empire, but as the silent architect of modern thought. The formulas of Al-Khwarizmi became the algorithms of computers. The ethics of Avicenna still echo in medicine. The observations of al-Biruni laid the groundwork for astronomy. Their legacy endures, not as names in forgotten manuscripts, but as the very framework of how we think, measure, heal, and dream. For when the world turned toward darkness, it was the Persian mind, luminous, inquisitive, and eternal, that carried the torch of reason through the night. Out of centuries of silence, from the ashes of fractured dynasties and forgotten banners, Persia rose once more, not with the thunder of conquest, but with the quiet pulse of faith. It was the dawn of the Safavid Empire, and for the first time in 1,000 years, the Persian world found a new heart, one that beat to the rhythm of Shia Islam. When Shah Ismail I emerged in the early 16th century, he was barely more than a boy, yet his vision carried the weight of a civilization's rebirth. His armies swept across the Iranian plateau like a storm, reborn from ancient winds. But what he built was not merely a kingdom, it was an identity. In his hands, Persia ceased to be a collection of provinces and tribes. It became a nation, united not only by language and land, but by belief. Under the Safavids, faith became the architecture of the state. Shia Islam was declared the official creed, not as a rejection of the past, but as its continuation, a new vessel for an eternal spirit. The Zoroastrian fire had once burned on mountain altars. Now it glowed in the lamps of mosques and the hearts of mystics. The old duality, light and darkness, truth and deceit, found new meaning in the stories of Karbala, in the sacrifice of Imam Hussein, and in the idea that faith itself could be resistance against oppression. In this transformation, Persia did not lose itself. It remembered itself. The reverence for poetry, beauty, and wisdom found a new home in the rituals of devotion. Pilgrimage replaced empire. Remembrance replaced conquest. The scholar and the mystic walked side by side, blending law with love, theology with art. The Safavid court became not only a seat of power, but a sanctuary for artists, philosophers, and architects who sought to turn belief into form. And so rose Isfahan, the city that would come to be called half the world. Beneath its turquoise domes and celestial arches, the vision of the Safavids took shape, not in gold or marble, but in symmetry, silence, and light. The Shah Mosque, the Lotfolla Mosque, and the grand Naqsh Jahan Square stood as reflections of heaven itself. Their walls were inscribed not with conquest, but with verses of divine beauty. Every tile, every calligraphic curve whispered the same truth: that paradise could be built on earth if the human heart remained aligned with the divine. While Europe tore itself apart in wars of religion, Persia was weaving theology into art, mysticism into identity. The Safavid awakening was not a return to empire through force, but through meaning. It was as if the Persian soul had shed its old armor of conquest and clothed itself in devotion, rediscovering that power, when fused with spirituality, becomes something enduring. From the royal courts to the smallest village, a distinct Persian identity began to form, one that was neither Arab nor Turkic, but deeply, profoundly Iranian. It was the rebirth of a civilization that understood the sacred not as separation, but as synthesis. The Safavid rulers stood as both kings and custodians of faith, their authority balanced between divine mandate and earthly governance. Through their reign, Persia once again became the bridge between worlds, East and West, faith and philosophy, the visible and the unseen. The empire's traders carried silk and spices, but also ideas, of tolerance, of introspection, of the endless dialogue between body and soul. And though the Safavid dynasty would one day fall, what it awakened never died. The identity it forged, of a Persia both ancient and spiritual, worldly and eternal, still breathes through the veins of Iran today. For in that age, faith did not conquer the Persian spirit, it completed it. The empire that once ruled through kings and warriors was reborn through saints and poets. Nowruz. And in that transformation, the heart of Persia, resilient, luminous and unbroken, began to beat once more. Long before the hum of engines and the shimmer of digital light connected our world, there was another network. One built not from wires or code, but from human footsteps, camel bells, and the whisper of wind over endless sands. It was called the Silk Road, though it carried far more than silk. Across deserts and mountains, through oasis towns and ancient gates, it carried the dreams of civilizations. And at its very heart stood Persia, the eternal crossroads between East and West. Here, caravans laden with silk, spices, jade and glass converged under the Persian sun. But what truly passed through Persia was not just trade. It was thought. Every caravan that entered its borders carried not only goods, but stories, languages, and beliefs. And Persia, ever the alchemist of civilization, transformed them. From Merv to Nishapur, Ray to Tabriz, cities rose as jewels upon this living artery of exchange. They were not merely markets, they were sanctuaries of wisdom. In their caravanserais, those fortress-like inns that dotted the routes, merchants and mystics, mathematicians and monks shared more than meals. They shared meaning. A Buddhist traveler from India might sit beside a Zoroastrian firekeeper, a Chinese scholar beside an Arab astronomer, and by morning their ideas would have mingled like the colors of a Persian carpet. Persia became the spiritual customs house of the world. Ideas entered its borders raw and left refined. Greek philosophy, Indian numerals, Chinese astronomy, and Arab theology all found new form in Persian hands. It was here that algebra gained structure, medicine found reason, and mysticism gained voice. The Silk Road was not merely a path for commerce. It was a road of souls, where the wisdom of the human race met and evolved. Under the Safavids, and before them the Seljuks and Abbasids, the Persian heartland thrived as the intellectual hub of this global flow. Scholars filled the libraries of Isfahan and Samarkand, copying, translating, and reimagining texts from distant worlds. Sufi mystics carried new interpretations of existence along these same routes, blending philosophy with divine longing. A verse spoken in Shiraz could echo in Damascus within months. An invention crafted in Nishapur could inspire minds as far away as Cairo or Cordoba. But Persia's gift to the Silk Road was more than intellect. It was balance. Where other empires sought dominance through conquest, Persia understood the power of exchange. The Silk Road was its empire, not built on blood, but on connection. Every traveler, every merchant who crossed its lands became part of a grander story, carrying fragments of Persian thought into the wider world. And so, when silk flowed westward, Sufi poetry flowed with it. When paper came from China, it met the Persian calligrapher's hand and was transformed into art. Even the architecture of faraway cities, from Mughal Delhi to Ottoman Istanbul, bore the soft echo of Persian aesthetics, that love of symmetry, garden and grace. In many ways, the Silk Road was the bloodstream of the ancient world, and Persia was its heart. Through its veins pulsed not only trade, but tolerance, not only profit, but philosophy. It was along these routes that the notion of a shared humanity first began to take shape, the quiet realization that while languages and beliefs may differ, the search for truth and beauty is universal. As centuries passed, empires rose and fell, the sands shifted, and the roads were buried beneath time. Yet, even today, the echoes of that exchange remain. The Persian poets who once spoke of love beyond borders, the astronomers who mapped both heaven and soul, their voices still whisper through the corridors of history. For the Silk Road was never just a map of trade, it was a pathway of consciousness, and Persia was its keeper. Where gold glittered, it offered wisdom. Where empires sought to rule, it chose to connect. And in that eternal exchange, Persia became what it had always been. Not merely a place on earth, but the meeting point of worlds, where the material and the spiritual forever journey side by side. In the fading glow of the 18th century, as the world entered a new age of empires and industry, Persia stood at a crossroads once more. The echoes of Cyrus and Khosrow had grown faint, replaced by the sound of foreign boots, telegraphs, and treaties. It was the age of the Qajars, a dynasty caught between memory and modernity, between the pride of an ancient civilization and the grasp of encroaching powers. Persia, once the heart of the world, now found itself surrounded. From the north, the Russian Empire crept down through the Caucasus. From the south, the British Empire stretched its arm through India and the Gulf. The Great Game, a shadow war of spies, trade routes, and influence, was unfolding, and Persia was the prize on the board. Yet even in this twilight, the old fire still flickered. The Qajar Shahs ruled from Tehran, a city that had grown from a humble fortress into the pulse of a wounded yet enduring empire. Their palaces shimmered with mirrored halls and painted ceilings, where the ghosts of Persepolis seemed to reflect in every glass. Courtiers bowed, poets recited verses in the dim glow of lanterns, and the ancient Persian love of art and beauty continued, even as the treasury emptied and borders shrank. It was an era of contrasts. Steamships docked at Persian ports, yet caravans still crossed the deserts. Telegraph lines cut across old caravan routes, yet messengers still rode on horseback through mountain passes. The Qajar kings, from Fath Ali Shah with his jeweled beard to Nasr al-Din Shah, the first Persian monarch to be photographed, dreamed of modernization but were bound by the web of history. Nasr al-Din Shah in particular embodied the paradox of his time. He admired Europe's railways and palaces, yet saw in them a reflection of Persia's lost greatness. He sought progress, commissioning schools, roads, and printing presses, but at the price of sovereignty. Concessions to British and Russian interests became the currency of survival. With each signed treaty, Persia lost another piece of its independence. But beneath this slow surrender, something remarkable stirred. The Persian people, poets, merchants, and mystics, refused to let the flame die. A new consciousness began to awaken in the bazaars and mosques. Intellectuals returning from Istanbul and Paris brought with them ideas of constitutionalism, of freedom and reform. They looked to their own past, to the justice of Cyrus, to the wisdom of the Avesta, and began to reimagine Persia not as a decaying empire, but as a living nation. By the dawn of the 20th century, the winds of change were no longer whispers. The constitutional revolution erupted, the first of its kind in the Islamic world. Clerics and craftsmen stood side by side, demanding a parliament, demanding law, demanding a voice. It was not rebellion for the sake of power, but a reclamation of identity, the echo of that ancient truth that no empire, however mighty, could define the Persian spirit. The Qajar dynasty, weakened and fractured, watched its power slip away. Yet even in decline, it had become a bridge, a final act in the great Persian drama before the modern world arrived. For within its ornate halls and crumbling walls, Persia learned to look inward once more, to remember that the essence of its strength had never been in armies or gold, but in the mind, the word, and the fire of the people. And so, as foreign powers carved their empires across the globe, Persia, weary but unbroken, remained. The Qajar twilight was not the end of the Persian story, but the dimming of one flame before another could rise. For when the light seemed weakest, it was only preparing to burn again, in new forms, under new names, but with the same eternal soul that had guided it for 5, sand years. Even in its darkest hour, Persia never bowed. It adapted, endured, and awaited the dawn. When the Qajar twilight finally faded, a new dawn rose over Persia, one wrapped not in tradition, but in steel, glass, and ambition. Out of a fractured empire and a weary monarchy emerged a man with a soldier's discipline and a reformer's dream. Reza Khan, later crowned Reza Shah Pahlavi. He envisioned a nation reborn, not as the ghost of an ancient empire, but as a modern power to rival the West. In his vision, the grandeur of Cyrus the Great would live again, not through conquest, but through progress. Railways cut through deserts that had once carried caravans. Factories rose where gardens once bloomed, and the hum of machines replaced the quiet rhythm of bazaars. The old Persia, wrapped in myth and mysticism, was being rewritten as Iran. The land of the Aryans, strong, united, and forward-looking. Reza Shah saw the past not as a comfort, but as a calling. He looked to the ruins of Persepolis and imagined an empire reborn in concrete and power lines. His reforms swept across every corner of life: education, dress, infrastructure, governance. The veil was discouraged, the clerics restrained, and the army strengthened. Iran, long pulled between foreign powers, was to stand on its own feet once more. And for a time, it seemed to work. Roads connected distant provinces, schools trained a new generation, and pride began to stir again in a people long weighed down by history. The ghost of decline was lifting. Yet, beneath the surface of this rebirth, something deeper began to tremble. The ancient soul that had always guided Persia's rhythm, now buried beneath the march of modernity. When Reza Shah's son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, ascended the throne, he inherited both a kingdom and an idea: the belief that Iran could once again be a symbol of civilization. His reign brought oil wealth, glittering palaces, and visions of a great civilization. The cities grew brighter, the universities fuller, and for the first time in centuries, Iran felt like a nation poised to rejoin the world stage. But progress came with a cost: a silencing. The deep connection between faith, land, and identity that had anchored Persian civilization for millennia began to fade. In the rush to modernize, Iran's rulers often mistook imitation for evolution. Western suits replaced robes, but not all hearts followed. Ancient festivals like Nowruz were celebrated with pomp, yet many felt that their meaning, the rebirth of the soul, had been traded for spectacle. The voice of the people, once heard in poetry and prayer, grew restless. The poets who once whispered truth to kings were replaced by propaganda and fear. Rural communities, guardians of old customs, were drawn into cities that no longer spoke their language. The ancient balance between progress and spirituality, between the sword and the soul, began to unravel. By the 1970s, the dream had reached its zenith and its breaking point. The Shah's celebrations at Persepolis, marking 2,500 years of monarchy, were meant to honor Cyrus, yet to many they felt hollow, an echo of the past without its spirit. As foreign dignitaries dined beneath the ruins of kings, ordinary Iranians watched from afar, disconnected from the pageantry that claimed to speak for them. And then came the tremor, first in whispers, then in chants, then in revolution. The streets filled not only with anger, but with longing, a yearning for something older than kings or ideologies. It was Persia's ancient spirit, awakening once again, demanding to be heard. The Shah's modern dream had sought to rebuild the empire of Cyrus, but in doing so, it had forgotten what made that empire eternal: the harmony between power and principle, progress and soul. For Persia's greatness had never been measured by monuments or machines, but by its balance between earth and spirit, between law and light. As the curtain fell on the Pahlavi dynasty, the world saw the end of a monarchy. But in truth, It was the continuation of a cycle, the eternal struggle between remembering and forgetting, between building a nation and preserving its soul. And through it all, the same quiet truth endured. Persia never died. It only changed its voice. In the winter of 1979, the streets of Tehran trembled, not just under the weight of protest, but under the weight of history itself. To the outside world, it was a revolution of politics, of ideology, of power. But to those who felt the pulse of the land beneath their feet, it was something far older, a voice that had been silent for centuries, rising once more. It was Persia's soul, demanding to be heard again. The spark had been building for years. Beneath the polished marble of modernization, a storm had been gathering, one made of faith, poverty, pride, and memory. The Shah's vision of progress had brought skyscrapers to ancient cities and oil wealth to foreign banks, but in doing so, it had buried the heart of a civilization that had always thrived on balance. In the bazaars, whispers became chants. In the mosques, sermons became calls. The farmers, the scholars, the merchants, those who had long carried Persia's memory in their songs and stories, now carried it in their fists. From the southern oil fields to the northern mountains, a single truth spread. The old order had forgotten the people, and the people had not forgotten who they were. As millions filled the streets, the air became thick with history. Flags waved, not only for the revolution, but for identity, for the memory of an ancient civilization that had endured conquerors, caliphs, and kings. The slogans of 1979 were wrapped in the language of justice, but beneath them pulsed something more timeless, the memory of Cyrus's mercy, the fire of Zoroaster, the poetry of Rumi. It was as if every dynasty that had ever ruled this land was being summoned to witness the moment. The empires of the past had risen and fallen upon this soil, and now the people themselves had become the empire, one built not on conquest, but on remembrance. When the monarchy finally collapsed, it was not just the fall of a Tumusin ruler. It was a reckoning with time. The revolution was both a return and a rebirth, the return of the collective spirit that had long been silenced, and the rebirth of a nation seeking to define itself once more. The modern age had promised progress, but Persia's heart demanded purpose. In the weeks that followed, the world watched as old symbols returned with new meaning. Black banners replaced royal insignias. Mosques echoed not with whispers, but with cries of victory and vengeance. And yet, behind the roar of politics, there lingered something quieter, the eternal rhythm of a people rediscovering their past, even as they shaped their future. For many, it was liberation. For others, loss. But for history, it was continuity. The Persian story, which had survived Alexander's fire, Arab conquest, and Mongol invasion, had once again transformed. The fire had changed its color, but not its essence. The revolution of 1979 was not merely an upheaval of rulers, it was the reassertion of memory. It was the soul of an ancient civilization re-emerging from beneath centuries of layers, declaring that identity could not be erased by modernity, nor sanctity replaced by spectacle. Yet, as with all great revolutions, victory carried its own shadows. The unity that had overthrown a monarchy soon fractured into competing visions of what Persia, now Iran, should be. The same question that had haunted every era resurfaced. Could the spiritual and the modern, the ancient and the new, coexist without consuming each other? And so, the revolution continued, not just in the streets or in politics, but in the hearts of Iranians themselves. Every poem recited in defiance, every ritual preserved in secret, every whisper of freedom carried the same ancient echo. Remember who you are. Because in the end, 1979 was never just a date in history. It was a mirror of eternity, reflecting the unbroken chain of a people who had forgotten nothing. For Persia's revolutions have never truly been about power. They have always been about memory, the fire that refuses to fade, the light that outlives every king, every creed, and every century. In the decades that followed the revolution, Iran became a nation suspended between two worlds, between the ancient and the modern, between devotion and discovery. The empire of Cyrus had given way to the Republic of Faith. Yet beneath the black banners and new laws, a deeper question lingered. Could a civilization built on 5,000 years of light truly live within shadows of its own making? The streets of Tehran became the stage of contradiction. Satellite dishes rose quietly above rooftops as loudspeakers called for prayer. Universities filled with young women in veils, many of them scientists, poets, and engineers, inheritors of a tradition that once gave the world Avicenna and Khayyam. The veil became more than cloth. It became a symbol of conflict, between tradition and freedom, between the divine and the human search for truth. In classrooms, a new generation studied physics and philosophy side by side, quoting both Einstein and Hafez. They were the children of a revolution, yet the heirs of a civilization that had never stopped asking questions. Iran had sought to define itself through faith, but faith itself was evolving, shaped by memory, challenged by modernity. The 1980s brought hardship. War tore across the land, consuming cities, families, and futures. Yet even amid fire and mourning, the spirit of Persia endured, in poetry, in art, in defiance. The sound of bombs mixed with the rhythm of verses written in candlelight. For every act of destruction, there was creation. For every silence, a whisper of resistance. When the war ended, another struggle began, one within the mind. The Iran that emerged was not the one that either kings or clerics had imagined. It was a living contradiction, a nation that prayed with one hand and coded with the other, that celebrated the past even as it reached for the future. Within this tension, something extraordinary too took shape, a quiet revolution of thought. Artists began to paint again. Filmmakers spoke through metaphor, and musicians wove ancient melodies with modern sounds. The Persian instinct to preserve beauty, even in constraint, found new ways to breathe. Women, once hidden behind the veil of expectation, became voices of change, their words and art echoing through a society still learning how to listen. Faith remained the heartbeat of the nation, but so too did curiosity. Every mosque stood beside a classroom, every holy text beside a textbook. Iran became a paradox that refused to resolve, and perhaps that was its strength. The same civilization that had once balanced Zoroastrian fire with Greek logic and Islamic revelation was now learning to balance belief with innovation. Yet the struggle continued, not between East and West, but within the Persian soul itself. How does a nation built on sacred memory move forward without losing itself? How does it carry both the fire of the ancients and the light of discovery without one extinguishing the other? For Iran, the veil and the vision were not enemies. They were reflections of the same eternal question: how to remain true to the divine while embracing the infinite. The scientist peering through a microscope, the scholar studying the Quran, the artist painting the soul of his homeland, all were participants in the same dialogue, one that began long before the revolution and will continue long after. And so, beneath the political storms and cultural shifts, Iran's heart continued to beat in its familiar rhythm, steady, enduring, searching. The fire of Ahura Mazda still burned behind the veil. The vision of the poets still shimmered beyond it. Because Persia's destiny was never to choose between faith and reason, but to unite them, as it always had. And in that balance, between veil and vision, the oldest civilization, on earth continued its quiet, radiant struggle to be both ancient and eternal. Empires rose, empires burned, and yet Through every ruin, through every silence, Iran endured. Like the mythic Simurgh of her own legends, she never truly perished. She waited in the embers, gathering the fragments of memory, until the time came to rise again. For thousands of years, her cities have fallen and risen, her dynasties faded and reborn. Yet her essence has remained unbroken, bound not to rulers or borders, but to an idea that civilization itself can be reborn from its own ashes. From the fire-lit halls of Persepolis to the mosques of Isfahan, from the gardens of Shiraz to the marble streets of Tehran, each age has left behind not destruction, but renewal. When the Macedonian conqueror came, he burned the palaces, but not the soul that built them. When Arab banners replaced Zoroastrian flames, the spirit of Persia flowed into the new faith, transforming it from within. When Mongols razed her cities to dust, from that dust rose poets, architects, and thinkers who reimagined the world's beauty. And when foreign powers drew borders and treaties, Iran, older than empires themselves, adjusted her shape, but not her heartbeat. The Phoenix of the East was not just reborn. She learned to reshape herself. With every conquest, she absorbed her conquerors. Greek ideals became Persianized. Arabic became a vessel for Persian philosophy. Mongol and Turkic dynasties became protectors of Persian art. Time and again, what began as invasion ended as inheritance. It was as if the land itself demanded continuity, the mountains holding memory, the deserts preserving silence, and the people turning suffering into song. Each generation seemed to awaken with the same question: how does a civilization survive eternity? The answer was never through conquest, but through reinvention. The poets became prophets of endurance. The artisans turned faith into form. Even politics, turbulent and shifting, could not erase the underlying pulse of culture. In every century, there were those who remembered, who rebuilt gardens, recopied manuscripts, rewove carpets, and retold the stories that kept the flame alive. The Simurgh, that great bird of Persian myth, is said to live in the tree of life, dying in its own fire only to rise from the ashes, renewed. It is no wonder Persians saw themselves in that symbol, for their history is not linear, it is cyclical, like the beating of wings across centuries. Empires such as the Achaemenids, the Parthians, the Sasanians, and the Safavids may have fallen, yet each left behind a light that still flickers in the collective soul of Iran. In the modern age, that spirit persists. Despite wars, revolutions, and sanctions, Iran's identity endures in 1,000 subtle ways, in the calligraphy that decorates new cities, in the melodies that drift through bazaars, in the verses that young poets whisper beneath the stars. The phoenix no longer needs to burn to rise. It now glows quietly, a reminder that survival itself is an art form. Even today, to walk through Iran is to move through time layered upon time, ancient stones beneath modern feet, old prayers beneath new tongues. Every ruin is a seed, every silence a preparation for rebirth. The world may change around her, but Iran, Persia, remains what she has always been, the bridge between past and future, between earth and eternity. For in the end, the phoenix does not rise because it refuses to die. It rises because it remembers who it was meant to be. And so does Iran, the phoenix of the East, forever reborn, forever remembering. Beneath the noise of politics, beneath the heavy weight of censors and walls, there runs a current, unseen but unbroken. It is the same current that once flowed through the verses of Hafez and the geometry of Isfahan, through the ink of Rumi's revelations and the brushstrokes that adorn the domes of Shiraz. It is the underground river of Persian art, a quiet defiance that has carried a civilization through every age of silence. After the revolution, the public stage changed. Paintings vanished from galleries, songs were forbidden, and words were measured with suspicion. Yet art, like water, finds its way. It seeps through cracks, flows beneath foundations, and nourishes what cannot be seen. In the basements of Tehran, poets gathered under dim light, whispering verses that could never be printed. In small apartments, filmmakers crafted stories that spoke in symbols, not slogans. And on the hidden frequencies of radio and tape, the voice of poetry continued to sing, faint, but alive. Every civilization has its underground, the space where spirit retreats when power rises. For Persia, that space became a refuge of creation. Artists spoke through metaphor, using flowers to represent freedom, the night to represent longing, and the dawn to whisper of truth's return. What could not be said outright was painted in silence, and what could not be shown was woven into rhythm and rhyme. Even as officials sought to define morality and truth, the poets quietly redefined beauty. They revived an ancient strategy, the language of allegory. It was the same art that had once hidden the mystic meanings of Rumi's Masnavi and the divine intoxication of Hafez's wine. The Persian tongue, long trained in subtlety, became a vessel for resistance. Every banned verse was a spark, every hidden canvas, a prayer for remembrance. In the 1990s, a new generation of creators emerged. Children of war, raised on memory and silence. They found freedom in imperfection, depth in metaphor, courage in stillness. Photographers turned ruins into art. Musicians blended ancient melodies with modern sounds, carrying the lament of the Ney into the pulse of the new century. Writers, censored at home, published abroad, their words crossing borders like exiled souls returning to the homeland of language. The underground river was no longer just poetry or music. It became identity itself. It reminded Iranians that art was not decoration. It was survival. It was how a people who had endured conquest, invasion, and censorship for millennia continued to speak without permission. And yet, something miraculous happened. What began underground began to rise again. Film festivals abroad celebrated Iranian cinema's quiet brilliance. Persian calligraphy, once confined to mosque walls, appeared in modern galleries. The same ancient symbols, the pomegranate, the flame, the bird, returned, not as ornaments, but as emblems of endurance. The underground river was resurfacing, its waters carrying both sorrow and strength. To this day, the current flows, through digital art shared in secret, through underground concerts, through the quiet persistence of creativity that refuses to die. Every poet who writes in exile, every painter who hides their work from view, every singer who whispers their song into a recorder, they are all tributaries of the same ancient stream. Persia has always known how to endure, not by rebellion alone, but by beauty. Where others fight with weapons, Persians fight with words, with rhythm, with light. And so, even when the surface seems still, when voices are hushed and streets fall silent, the underground river continues to move, shaping the unseen landscape of the nation's soul. It carries memory, longing, and hope. For in Iran, art is not a luxury. It is the breath between generations, the hidden flame that refuses to fade. And though centuries may pass, the river flows on, eternal, quiet, unstoppable, carrying Persia forward, one whispered verse at a time. Long before modern engineers learned to bend nature to their will, the ancient Persians learned to live with it. In the heart of their vast empire, where deserts kissed the mountains and sun scorched the plains, they found not obstacles but equations. Every gust of wind, every drop of water, every angle of sunlight was studied, understood, and transformed into living architecture. Theirs was a science of balance, not conquest, a knowledge born from respect for the earth's rhythm. High above the sands, the wind towers of Yazd still stand, tall, silent sentinels of an ancient intelligence. These badgers, as they were called, could capture the faintest desert breeze and guide it through chambers and tunnels, cooling homes in the heart of the hottest lands. Long before electricity, long before air conditioning, Persia had found a way to tame the air. Their design was not merely practical, it was poetic. Each tower was shaped according to the winds that ruled its region, an architectural dialogue between man and nature that continues to whisper across centuries. Beneath the ground, another miracle flowed unseen. The qanats, deep, dark arteries of civilization. These underground channels carried water from mountain springs to thirsty villages and farmlands hundreds of miles away. Dug by hand, aligned with precise geometry, they followed gradients so subtle that even modern surveyors marvel at their perfection. The Persians knew that life could not depend on chance. It had to be engineered. And yet, their engineering never severed its tie to the natural order. It harmonized with it. This mastery extended beyond stone and soil. The ancient Persians built observatories to watch the stars and measure time itself. Their astronomers calculated the length of the solar year with astonishing precision, centuries before European scientists would refine it. In their temple, S of fire and light, the eternal flame was not merely a symbol of faith. It represented the constancy of natural law, the order within the universe that guided both gods and men. Their architecture reflected this cosmic understanding. Every Persian garden was a map of paradise, divided into 4 parts to represent the elements of creation: earth, air, water, and fire. Streams crossed like celestial paths, fruit trees symbolized abundance, and the air itself was shaped by geometry. The garden was not decoration. It was a meditation on the structure of the cosmos. In their cities, systems of refrigeration and irrigation revealed an understanding of thermodynamics that modern science would later rediscover. Ice houses, massive domed structures called yakshals, used evaporation, shade, and airflow to preserve ice even in the fiercest desert heat. At night, under a sky glittering with stars, villagers drew cool water from within them, a quiet miracle of design that blurred the boundary between human ingenuity and the laws of nature. And through all these innovations ran a single idea, that knowledge is sacred. In Persia, science and spirituality were never divided. To study the stars was to understand creation. To harness water was to honor life. Engineers were not merely builders, they were interpreters of divine order. Each discovery, each invention, was an act of devotion, a reaffirmation that the world was meant to be understood, not exploited. Today, as modern civilization struggles with balance between progress and preservation, the wisdom of ancient Persia feels prophetic. Its engineers knew what we are only beginning to rediscover, that sustainability is not a trend, but a timeless truth. The wind towers still stand, the qanats still flow, the gardens still bloom. They are not relics of a lost world, but messages from a civilization that found harmony in sea. Complexity and grace in precision. Persia's science was not about controlling nature. It was about remembering that to survive, humanity must first learn how to listen. Each year, as winter loosens its grip and light returns to the northern sky, an ancient rhythm awakens, one that predates empires, prophets, and kings. In homes from Tehran to Tajikistan, from the valleys of Kurdistan to the mountains of Afghanistan, millions gather around a single flame, greeting the dawn of Nowruz, the Persian New Year, the eternal spring. It is more than a celebration. It is the heartbeat of a civilization that refused to die. For over 3,000 years, Nowruz has marked the turning of the world, a moment when time itself renews, and the soul of Persia remembers who it is. Long before calendars and clocks, before borders and flags, This day was sacred. The balance of light and darkness, when the earth stands still for a breath, and life begins again. To understand Nowruz is to understand Persia's essence. It is not a holiday born of conquest or creed, but of harmony between man, nature, and the cosmos. Rooted in the teachings of Zoroaster, it celebrates the victory of light over darkness, truth over falsehood, growth over decay. The ancients believed that on this day, Ahura Mazda's creation was renewed, and every living thing shared in that rebirth. As the vernal equinox approaches, preparations begin. Homes are cleaned from corner to corner, not merely for tidiness, but to drive out the remnants of the old year's stagnation. It is an act of purification, a symbolic washing of the soul. Then families set the haft-seen table. 7 sacred items, each beginning with the Persian letter S, each representing an eternal truth. There is sabze, sprouted greens, for rebirth. Seer, garlic, for health. Seeb, apples, for beauty and life. Samanu, a sweet pudding, for patience and abundance. Senjed, the dried fruit of the lotus, for love and wisdom. Sirke, vinegar, for transformation. And sumac, red spice of dawn, for the rising sun and the triumph, pH of light. Around these, symbols gather: goldfish for movement, mirrors for reflection, candles for enlightenment, painted eggs for creation itself. Each family's table becomes a microcosm of the universe, a reminder that the same order which governs the stars also lives within the human heart. When the precise moment of the equinox arrives, calculated not by the clock but by celestial alignment, people pause. Silence falls, then laughter, embraces, and the greeting that has crossed centuries: Nowruz Mubarak, blessed new day. It is a phrase that carries the echo of empires, the survival of language, the memory of ancestors who refused to forget. Through invasions, through dynasties, through revolutions, Nowruz endured. It survived the fall of the Achaemenids, the coming of Islam, the rise of the Mongols, and the waves of colonial ambition. No ruler could erase it. No conqueror could suppress it. Because Nowruz is not written on parchment, it lives in the rhythm of the earth itself. Even today, as cities modernize and traditions shift, the flame remains. Children jump over small fires on Çaharshanbe Suri, whispering, "Give me your red, take my yellow," asking the flame to take away illness and weakness, to leave only strength. Old and young alike gather beneath the spring sky, as their ancestors did thousands of years ago, to honor the same eternal cycle. Nowruz is more than a Persian New Year. It is a message from the ancient world that rebirth is not just for the earth, but for humanity itself. Every year, when the world awakens from its winter sleep, Persia rises too, not as an empire of stone, but as an empire of memory. For as long as the sun rises and the equinox returns, Persia will live, in the green of the sprouts, the warmth of the flame, and the whisper that greets every dawn. This is not the end. It is the beginning once more. 5,000 years. Countless kings, conquerors, prophets, and revolutions, and yet one spirit remains. From the ashes of ancient empires to the skyline of modern Tehran, Persia endures. It has worn many faces: Achaemenid, Parthian, Sasanian, Islamic, imperial, revolutionary. But beneath every transformation, the same pulse beats. A civilization that refuses to die because it never truly lived in marble or throne, but in the mind and memory of its people. Long before the first stone of Persepolis was laid, the soul of Persia was already awake, in the rhythm of the seasons, in the songs sung beside sacred fires, in the belief that truth and order are the twin pillars of existence. That same vision would shape empires and philosophies alike, echoing across the centuries like a song no conqueror could silence. When the armies of Alexander marched through her cities, when the Mongols thundered across her plains, when foreign flags flew over her mountains, Persia bent, but never broke. For her strength was not in armies or palaces. It was in her poets, her scholars, her dreamers, in the quiet endurance of a culture that carried its wisdom from generation to generation, even when the world seemed determined to erase it. Ferdowsi, in the darkness of conquest, wrote the Shah-Nameh, an epic not just of heroes, but of survival. His verses resurrected forgotten kings, rekindled ancient pride, and restored a nation's voice. And from his pen flowed the reminder that identity is not bound to power. It is rooted in memory. That memory found new forms in every age, in the golden glow of Sasanian palaces, in the verses of Hafez and Rumi, in the mosaics of Isfahan and the calligraphy of Shiraz. Even when faith changed, when languages blended, when rulers came and went, the Persian soul quietly adapted, absorbing, transforming, never dissolving. It is a civilization that Leah, and the greatest secret of survival, to evolve without forgetting. Today, that spirit still moves through the air of Iran, in the laughter of bazaars, the rituals of Nowruz, the precision of Persian architecture, the hospitality that has defined the land since Cyrus welcomed the world. Modern Iran, for all its complexities, is not a break from the past. It is its continuation, a living chapter of a story that began when history itself was young. For Persia was never just a land, it was an idea that knowledge is sacred, that beauty is a form of truth, and that humanity's highest purpose is balance between light and shadow, reason and faith, power and mercy. It is this philosophy that allowed Persia to influence civilizations far beyond its borders, shaping science, art and governance from Greece to India, from the Islamic Golden Age to the Renaissance that followed. And so, across millennia, Persia has become something more than a nation. It has become a mirror, reflecting humanity's endless search for meaning. Its ruins speak not of endings, but of endurance. Its gardens remind us that even in the harshest deserts, harmony can bloom. Its people, scattered yet united in spirit, carry within them the same light that burned in the temples of Ahura Mazda. Empires fade, languages evolve, borders shift. But Persia, Iran, remains a thread unbroken in the tapestry of time. Its story is the story of civilization itself, how memory becomes identity, and how a culture, once awakened, can never truly sleep again. The world may forget its kings, but not its wisdom. The temples may crumble, but not the fire. And as long as there are hearts that remember the dawn, Persia, the immortal civilization, will rise with the sun once more. As the centuries pass and empires vanish into dust, one truth remains: Persia endures. Her story is not carved only in stone or written in forgotten tongues, but carried in the hearts of millions who still greet the rising sun as their ancestors once did. From the poetry of Rumi to the gardens of Shiraz, from the whispers of Persepolis to the lights of modern Tehran, the flame still burns. Persia never died. She simply became the world, her spirit woven into the art, science, and soul of humanity itself. If this journey through time moved you, let your curiosity live on. Like, share, and subscribe to Mysteries of Earth, and tell us what part of this ancient world fascinated you most. Until next time, remember, civilizations may fall, but their light, once kindled, never fades.